Welcome to Finnegan's Fireside Tales. Today we will be reading The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Chapter 1. Into the Primitive. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing, not alone for himself, but for every tidewater dog, strong of muscle and with warm, long hair, from Puget Sound to San Diego. Because men, groping in the Arctic darkness, had found a yellow metal, and because steamship and transportation companies were booming the find, thousands of men were rushing into the Northland. These men wanted dogs, and the dogs they wanted were heavy dogs, with strong muscles by which to toil and furry coats to protect them from the frost. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. Judge Miller's place it was called. It stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which glimpses could be caught of the wide, cool veranda that ran around its four sides. The house was approached by gravel driveways which wound about through wide-spreading lawns and under the interlacing boughs of tall poplars. At the rear things were on even a more spacious scale than at the front. There were great stables, where a dozen grooms and boys held forth, rows of vine-clad servants' cottages, an endless and orderly array of outhouses, long grape arbors, green pastures, orchards and berry patches. Then there was the pumping plant for the artesian well, and the big cement tank where Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge and kept cool in the hot afternoon. Among the terriers he stalked imperiously, and Toots and Isabel he utterly ignored, for he was king over all creeping, crawling, flying things of Judge Miller's place, humans included. His father, Elmo, a huge St. Bernard, had been Judge Miller's inseparable companion, and Buck bid fair to follow in the way of his father. He was not so large, he weighed only 140 pounds, for his mother, Shep, had been a Scotch shepherd dog. Nevertheless, 140 pounds, to which was added the dignity that comes of good living and universal respect, enabled him to carry himself in right royal fashion. During the 4 years since his puppyhood, he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. He had a fine pride in himself, was even a trifle egotistical, as country gentlemen sometimes become because of their insular situation. But he had saved himself by not becoming a mere pampered house dog. Hunting and kindred outdoor delights had kept down the fat and hardened his muscles, and to him, as to the cold-tubbing races, the love of water had been a tonic and a health preserver. And this was the manner of dog Buck was in the fall of 1897, when the Klondike strike dragged men from all the world into the frozen north. But Buck did not read the newspapers, and he did not know that Manuel, one of the gardener's helpers, was an undesirable acquaintance. Manuel had one besetting sin: he loved to play Chinese lottery. Also, in his gambling, he had one besetting weakness: faith in a system. And this made his damnation certain. For to play a system requires money, while the wages of a gardener's helper do not lap over the needs of a wife and numerous progeny. The judge was at a meeting of the Raisin Growers Association, and the boys were busy organizing an athletic club on the memorable night of Manuel's treachery. No one saw him and Buck go off through the orchard on what Buck imagined was merely a stroll, and with the exception of a solitary man, no one saw them arrive at the little flag station known as College Park, where the man talked with Manuel and money chinked between them. "You might wrap up the goods before you deliver 'em," the stranger said gruffly, and Manuel doubled a piece of stout rope around Buck's neck under the collar. "Twist it, and you'll choke 'em plenty," said Manuel, and the stranger grunted a ready affirmative. Buck had accepted the rope with quiet dignity. To be sure, it was an unwanted performance, but he had learned to trust in men he knew, and to give them credit for a wisdom that outreached his own. But when the ends of the rope were placed in the stranger's hands, he growled menacingly. He had merely intimated his displeasure, in his pride believing that to intimate was to command. But to his surprise, the rope tightened around his neck, shutting off his breath. In quick rage, he sprang at the man, who met him halfway, grappling him with a fury that was met by Buck's fury, and at the height of the struggle. But the rope tightened mercilessly, while Buck struggled in a fury, his great chest panting and tongue lolling out of his mouth. Then his senses came back, and he lay where he had fallen, the rope still tight about his neck, but mercifully loosened by one who spoke in French. "That was a quick job, eh, Perrault?" The stranger who had just handled Buck was a French-Canadian, and he nodded. We get 'em quick, eh? Too much trouble if Buck fight like hell. That big dog make too much row. In the midst of this trouble, Buck had little chance to note how he was passed along from hand to hand till he was shoved into a baggage car. Here he lay for the remainder of the night, nursing his wrath and wounded pride. He had never been handled this way before, and he did not understand. What did it mean? He did not know, except that it was not good. Again, the rope was tight around his neck, but this time there was no chance to struggle. Buck's strength ebbed slowly, and he was dimly conscious that he was being jolted along in some kind of conveyance. The last thing he remembered before unconsciousness smothered him was that the man was talking, and that he understood one word: Frisco. So passed Buck out of his easy seat in life, from the sunshine and the Santa Clara Valley into the uneasy seat of the baggage car. Chapter 2. The Law of Club and Fang. Buck's first day on the dire beach was like a nightmare. Every hour was filled with shock and surprise. He had been suddenly jerked from the heart of civilization and flung into the heart of things primordial. No lazy, sun-kissed life was this, with nothing to do but loaf and be bored. Here was neither peace nor rest, nor a moment's safety. All was confusion and action, and every moment life and limb was in peril. There was imperative need to be constantly alert, for these dogs and men were not town dogs and men. They were savages, all of them, who knew no law but the law of club and fang. He had never seen dogs fight as these wolfish creatures fought, and his first experience taught him an unforgettable lesson. It is true, it was a vicarious experience, else he would not have lived to profit by it. Curly was the victim. They were camped near the log store, where she, in her friendly way, made advances to a husky dog the size of a full-grown wolf, though not half so large as she. There was no warning, only a leap in like a flash, a metallic clip of teeth, a leap out equally swift, and Curly's face was ripped open from eye to jaw. It was the wolf manner of fighting, to strike and leap away, but there was more to it than this. 30 or 40 huskies ran to the spot and surrounded the combatants in an intent and silent circle. Buck did not comprehend that silent intentness, nor the eager way with which they were licking their chops. Curly rushed her antagonist, who struck again and leaped aside. He met her next rush with the same luck, repeating time and again with machine-like regularity, and Curly was cut and slashed with every jump. Then she broke down, squirming and writhing, sobbing and crying, while she rolled about on the ground. Buck saw, and it was the last he saw of Curly. Mercedes screamed, but was thrust back. The circle became a mass of snarling bodies, with Curly underneath. Buck knew she was dead. The lesson was driven home to Buck. A fang had pierced her throat. This was the law of the club and fang. He had never seen dogs fight like wolves before, and his instincts warned him of the life that was to come. It was to be a life of toil, of suffering, of fierce and bitter struggle. And this was the first of many lessons he was to learn in the Northland. Francois, the French-Canadian who had bought Buck, seemed to understand dogs well. He spoke to them all in a kindly way, and they wagged their tails and understood. But when they misbehaved, he whirled his whip, and they understood that better. Perrault, who was with him, was a little weazened man who wore spectacles and carried an air of dignity which Buck could not mistake. He was a government courier, and would be a hard master. Buck's mates were of the wildest sort. Billy and Joe were two brothers, huskies, cast in different moulds. Billy's one fault was his good nature, while Joe was sour and introspective, with a perpetual snarl and a malignant eye. Spitz was the leader, a large, white, heavy dog, with a friendly way of smiling which foretokened nothing good. Dave was morose and solitary, not interested in anything save when the traces were fastened upon him. The harness was a new experience for Buck. His mates understood it, and when Francois fastened him in, he was a clumsy novice. He bucked and fought against restraint, but Dave and Spitz leaped upon him in rage, and he was promptly punished. The club loomed large in Francois's hand, and Buck remembered the man in the red sweater. Instinctively he submitted, and afterward learned to pull in the traces. There was more discipline than this. Buck had to learn to stop at hoe, to go ahead at mush, to swing wide at haw, and to swing short at gee, and he had to learn to keep the traces taut, and nothing was too small or too great for him to learn. He learned to eat his food with dispatch, and to snatch what he could from his comrades. He learned to avoid a blow, and to give quick battle when necessary. And he learned, above all, that the club and the fang were law. Perrault and Francois were fair men, swart half-breeds, and knew the ways of the north. They understood dogs and how to work them. Buck had never seen dogs work before, but he was quick to catch on. At first he was confused by the system of commands, but in time he understood, and his pride grew. He was beaten, he knew that, but he was not broken. He learned too well the lesson of obedience. That night, after supper, Buck lay down to sleep, but he was astounded to see that his mates had disappeared. Perrault laughed at him and called him a greenhorn. Then he showed Buck how to dig a hole in the snow and lie down in it, warm and snug. Buck copied him, and when he awoke, he was surprised at the warmth. So began Buck's initiation into the life of the Northland, and with each passing day he was beaten, starved, frozen, and worked, but he grew strong and he learned. Chapter 3. The Dominant Primordial Beast. The dominant primordial beast was strong in Buck, and under the fierce conditions of trail life it grew and grew. Yet it was a secret growth. His newborn cunning gave him poise and control. He was too busy adjusting himself to the new life to feel at ease, and not only did he not pick fights, but he avoided them whenever possible. A certain deliberateness characterized his attitude. He was not prone to rashness, and when he did make a move, it was sure. Spitz ran out his tongue and laughed in the face of it. All this was indicative of Buck's development. The dominant primordial beast was beginning to assert itself, but it was secret, as yet, and cunning. He had learned well the law of club and fang. He knew he had not been given fair play, but at the same time he did not waste time on useless resentment. He simply bided his time, and when he was ready, he would take his revenge. Spitz was the arch-enemy. Buck hated him from the first, and Spitz hated Buck with an equal hatred. They were never friendly. Spitz was a practiced fighter, a bully, who loved to lord it over his fellows. Buck would not submit. He was too proud, too determined. His strength and cunning were growing, and he bided his time. The inevitable battle began one night after supper. Buck had made his bed in the snow and was preparing to sleep when Spitz rushed upon him. Buck sprang to his feet, his hair bristling, his lips lifted and snarling. The two circled about, the white teeth gleaming. But before they could close in, the camp was invaded. A pack of starving huskies from an Indian village, gaunt and terrible, had broken into camp. They were mad with hunger. They sprang upon the dogs and the food. Pandemonium broke loose. Buck was swept away by the rush. He fought with a fury he had never known before. Teeth and claws tore at him, and he tore back. He felt the joy of battle, the sheer ecstasy of it. The dominant beast within him roared. The team fought like demons, but they were overwhelmed. The food was gone, the camp in ruins. The men beat back the marauders with clubs and axes, but the damage was done. The dogs were slashed and bleeding, some were killed. Buck himself was torn and bleeding, but his spirit exulted. After that night, Buck and Spitz were more bitter enemies than ever. Spitz had taken advantage of the confusion to attack Buck, and Buck had not forgotten. Spitz was a devil, cunning and cruel. He bullied the weak dogs, beat them into submission, and lorded it over the camp. But Buck grew daily in strength and cunning. The time came at last. It was on the trail. Spitz had stolen Buck's nest, and when Buck attempted to reclaim it, Spitz was ready. The fight was long and terrible. The circle of dogs closed about them, watching. Spitz fought with the skill of long experience. He was a master fighter. Buck was new, but he had strength and a cunning born of the wild. He had studied Spitz, and he had learned. They fought in silence, with grim determination. Buck was torn and bleeding, but he gave back blow for blow, fang for fang. The circle of dogs watched in tense silence. At last, Buck made his move. He broke Spitz's guard, drove him down, and closed his jaws on his enemy's foreleg. There was a crack of breaking bone. Spitz went down. The circle broke, and the dogs rushed in upon Spitz, as they had upon Curly. But Buck stood and looked on. He had made his kill. Spitz was finished, and Buck stood victorious, the dominant primordial beast, ruler of the camp. Chapter 4. Who has won to mastership? Eh? What I say? I speak true when I say dat Buck two devils. This was Francois's speech next morning, when he discovered Spitz missing and Buck covered with wounds. He drew him to the fire and rubbed him down with some of the half-breed's skill. Perrault nodded gravely. He had great faith in Francois's judgment, and he recognized that Buck was no ordinary dog. The death of Spitz brought the problem of leadership to the fore. Perrault and Francois argued long as to who should succeed. Francois held for Sol-leks, who was old and experienced, and who had always acquitted himself creditably in the traces. Perrault leaned toward Buck, who he felt had proved his superiority. Francois put Buck in the lead. Buck sprang forward with eagerness. He had coveted the leadership, and he meant to have it, but Francois was not so easily won. He tried again with Sol-leks. Buck bristled and growled menacingly. Francois cried out angrily, and Buck backed away. Again, Francois brought Sol-leks forward, but Buck rushed upon him and drove him back. Perrault laughed. "Look at Buck. He want to be lead dog, that's sure. Eh? What I say? I speak true when I say dat Buck two devils." Francois's patience was exhausted. He brought the heavy club, and Buck crouched down, trembling with suppressed eagerness, but refused to budge from his place. Sol-leks was brought forward again, but Buck stood his ground. He would not give way. Francois lashed him savagely, but he did not move. He had made up his mind. He would not be beaten. Finally, Perrault intervened. "Let Buck have it. You see what he do." So Buck was given the lead. He sprang into his place with pride, and when the team pulled out, he set the pace with a strength and determination that astonished them all. He was born to lead. He understood the work. He inspired the dogs. He dominated them. Under his leadership, the team went better than it had ever gone before. Perrault was delighted. Francois was astonished, and Buck exulted. He had found his place. Buck made no mistakes. He kept the traces taut. He saw that no dog shirked. He punished the lazy. He encouraged the weak. He brought order and discipline. The team flew over the trail, covering in a day what had once taken them a day and a half. Perrault and Francois were proud of their dogs, but most of all of Buck. Perrault's dispatches were of great importance, and the speed and efficiency of his team won him official approval. He and Francois boasted of Buck, telling how he had fought and conquered Spitz, how he had taken the lead and made the team the best on the trail. But the Northland was stern and savage. The work was hard, the food was scant, the cold was pitiless. Buck grew harder, stronger, fiercer. He learned to bite the ice from his paws, to sleep in the snow without discomfort, to eat anything and everything, and to fight for it. The primitive beast in him grew and exulted. He was master, and he knew it. Then came the end of Perrault and Francois. Orders came, and they turned the dogs over to a Scotch half-breed who drove the male team. Buck and his mates went on, mile after mile, day after day, under the whip and the club, but Buck was always in the lead. He was master, and no one disputed it. Chapter 5. The Toil of Trace and Trail. 30 days from the time it left Dawson, the saltwater mail, with Buck and his mates at the fore, arrived at Skagay. They were in a wretched state, worn out and worn down. Buck's 140 pounds had dwindled to 115. The rest of his mates, though lighter dogs, had fared worse. Pike, the malingerer, who had never pulled a pound that he could avoid, was now limping and wobbly. Sol-leks was limping, and Dub was suffering from a badly sprained shoulder blade. They were so tired, the men could not stir them up, nor could the club lash them into action. Perrault had departed with his dispatches, and Francois also had gone, leaving them in charge of the Scotch half-breed. For 3 days they lay in the harness. For 3 days they held out, but they were finished dogs. The toil of trace and trail had at last exhausted them. The half-breed tried to be fair, but he was not overkind. His 20 to 30-mile drags day after day had taken the last bit of strength from them. Buck stood it, but his strength was gone. He had learned the law of club and fang, and he met it squarely. But he was no longer the same dog. His muscles were wasted, his bones ached, and his spirit drooped. And then came the end. One morning, the half-breed turned them over to 3 tenderfeet from the States, Hal, Charles, and Mercedes. They were a family of incompetents. Hal was a youth of 19 or 20, with a callow face. Charles was middle-aged, with a watery eye and weak mouth. Mercedes was Charles's wife and Hal's sister. They knew nothing about dogs, nothing about the trail, nothing about the Northland. They overloaded the sled. They packed everything they could lay hands on, including a tent, blankets, dishes, clothes, and even a stove. The dogs were put in harness, and the whip was laid on. But the load was too heavy. The sled stuck fast. The tenderfeet whipped the dogs, swore at them, beat them, but the sled would not budge. At last, some bystanders advised them to cut down the load. Half the load was thrown out, and the sled moved. It was the beginning of the end. The tenderfeet knew nothing of dogs. They fed them irregularly, sometimes too much, sometimes too little, and always of poor quality. They overworked them, underfed them, beat them mercilessly. The dogs grew thinner, weaker, hungrier. Pike was the first to go. Dub followed. Then the others dropped off one by one. Hal was cruel. He carried a club and a whip, and he used them savagely. Charles was weak and foolish. Mercedes wept and nagged, interfering in everything, crying over the dogs, petting them, feeding them out of hand, then quarrelling with her husband and brother. The camp was a bedlam of wrangling, beating, and wailing. Buck pulled on, but his strength was failing. He was starving, beaten, exhausted. He felt death pressing close, but he held on. His pride, his stubbornness, kept him to the traces. One day they staggered into John Thornton's camp on the White River. The dogs were mere skeletons, and Buck could go no further. Hal was beating him savagely with a club when Thornton sprang forward. "You poor devil," he cried, his eyes blazing. "If you strike that dog again, I'll kill you." Hal sneered and raised the club. Thornton sprang at him, knocked him down, and wrenched the club from his hand. Mercedes screamed. Charles protested, but Thornton stood over Buck, protecting him. "Cut him out," he said. "He's done for. You can't take him with you. He'll die on the trail." Hal raged, but he dared not attack Thornton. He and his family went on, beating the remaining dogs. A mile down the trail, they broke through the rotten ice and went to the bottom, sled, dogs, men, and woman all. Buck lay in Thornton's camp, too weak to move, too near death to care. But he had found a master such as he had never known, and he lay quietly, knowing that he was safe. Chapter 6. For the Love of a Man. When Buck received the promise of John Thornton's protection, he felt that this was the man he had been waiting for all his life. He had never known such kindness, such understanding. Thornton had saved his life, and from that hour Buck gave him the strength of his heart and soul. Thornton nursed him carefully. Day and night he tended to him, feeding him broth and pieces of meat, rubbing his muscles and speaking to him with gentle words. Slowly Buck regained strength. His wounds healed, his ribs ceased to show, and his eyes grew bright again. He loved Thornton with a love that was passionate, complete, and burning. This love had nothing of servility in it. It was not the love of a dog for a man who holds the club and whip. It was a love fierce and unselfish, a love that asked no return. Buck would follow Thornton to the ends of the earth. He would leap into fire for him, and once, indeed, he did. It was at a camp on the 40 Mile when Thornton, sitting by the fire, was joking with some men. Suddenly, a quarrel arose, and one man, in a fit of anger, struck Thornton. Without a moment's hesitation, Buck sprang upon him, his teeth at his throat. Men tore him away, but not before he had torn the flesh and drawn blood. Thornton was laughing, but he ordered Buck released. "It's all right," he said. "He thought you were hurting me, and he couldn't stand it." Another time, Thornton fell into a wild river. The current was swift, the water icy. Without pause, Buck plunged in. The cold bit into his flesh, the water carried him downstream, but he fought desperately, swimming with all his might. He caught Thornton by the clothes and held on until they were both pulled ashore. Buck lay gasping, half dead with exhaustion, but he had saved his master, and once, to prove Buck's strength, Thornton made a wager. He bet that Buck could pull a sled loaded with 1,000 pounds for 100 yards. Men laughed and jeered, but Thornton piled the load on, lashed it fast, and harnessed Buck. At the word, Buck strained. His muscles knotted, his breath came in gasps, his eyes bloodshot. Inch by inch the sled creaked forward. The men shouted, then fell silent, watching in awe. Buck pulled the load the full 100 yards. Thornton threw his arms around him, and the crowd burst into cheers. Thornton had won his wager, and Buck had won glory. All this time the call of the wild was sounding in Buck's heart. In the forest he would sometimes steal away, listening to the mysterious sounds, sniffing the scents of wolf and moose. The wild was drawing him, but always he returned to Thornton. The love held him. For the love of a man, he delayed the call of the wild. Chapter 7. The Sounding of the Call. When Buck earned $1,600 in 5 minutes for John Thornton, he made it possible for his master to pay off certain debts and to embark on the long-cherished journey into the East in quest of a fabled lost mine. The men had heard vague rumors of it from the Indians, a place where a stream ran over beds of yellow metal, where gold lay thick like gravel on the ground. With Hans and Pete, his partners, Thornton set forth. Weeks passed into months. They wandered through strange, silent lands, where no white man had ever been. They hunted their food with the rifle, they fished the streams, and wherever they pitched camp, Buck roamed the forests, ever alert, ever drawn by the call. He heard it at twilight, in the hush of the trees, in the distant howl of wolves. Sometimes he would follow it for miles, creeping like a shadow, silent and stealthy. He killed for the joy of killing, as in the old days of the primordial beast. He ran down a black bear, fought him, and killed him, though the bear tore his flesh with raking claws. He brought down moose, great and strong, battling them for days. The dominant beast in him exulted, rejoiced. He had come into his own again. One night, by the campfire, far away in the forest, Buck heard a long-drawn howl, the call of a wolf. He sprang to his feet, quivering. The forest was alive with it. Again and again it came, until he answered. Head lifted, throat throbbing, he howled back. It was the call of the wild. Still, he returned to camp. Love held him. He could not leave Thornton, but he wandered farther and farther afield, staying away for days. Once he met a wolf face to face. The wild brother crouched and whined, and Buck advanced cautiously. They sniffed noses. For hours they ran side by side, silent, swift. But when Buck remembered Thornton, he turned back. Then came the end. Buck returned one day to find the camp destroyed. The Indians had come. Thornton, Hans, and Pete lay dead, their bodies pierced with arrows. The dogs had been killed. Buck rushed upon the murderers with a fury that was terrible to see. He sprang at them, slashed, and tore. They fled shrieking before him, but many he dragged down, and those that escaped carried the tale of the ghost dog, the spirit of the wild. But when it was over, Buck returned to Thornton's body. He lay down beside it, mourned and mourned with the grief of a man. He would never know love again, never know the touch of a kind hand, the sound of a gentle voice. The last tie was broken, and the call sounded louder than ever. Buck answered it, and this time he did not return. He joined the wild brothers, running with them, hunting with them, killing with them. In the fall, at the time of the yearly gathering of the wolves, he was seen leading the pack. A great, ghostly wolf, larger than any other, with a mighty chest and shoulders and eyes that burned with a strange fire. The Yehats tell of the ghost dog, who runs at the head of the pack, who is fearless and terrible, who kills with a single leap, and who is more cunning than any wolf. They say he haunts the valley where John Thornton died, and at times, when the moon shines and the wind is still, he comes alone to the place of the killing. There he stands and howls, a long, mournful howl, till the forest echoes with it. And some say it is the call of his lost master, and some say it is the call of the wild. But of this they are sure. When they hear that cry, they shiver, for it is the cry of the ghost dog, the call that has been answered.